It's good to see you all here today. I would like to warmly welcome all of you, our audience and our prominent experts. As you have already heard, now we are going to focus a little more on business clusters and networks. And we would like to talk about how to raise, how to increase the competitive potential of business clusters and business networks in Poland, in Lithuania, and how to foster the international expansion of business clusters and networks. Our discussion panel is related to a project that was focused on internationalization and commercialization of business clusters and networks. That project was co-financed within a Leonardo da Vinci program. Before we start our discussion, let me introduce our experts. Let me start from the end with the managers of some Polish cluster organizations. I would like to introduce Mrs. Maria Woźniak, who represents the Polish architectural glass manufacturing cluster. I would like to welcome Mrs. Sylwia Mager, who represents the e-commerce connections cluster, a specialist in logistics and trade and in human resources. And last but not least, let me welcome our foreign prominent guest, Mr. Philip Ammerman, who is the managing partner and co-founder of Navigator Consulting from United Kingdom. And let me welcome Sharunas Pundius, who is consultant of the Human Resource Research and Development Institute in Lithuania. Before we go to our discussion, let me tell you just some words about clusters that, as you probably know, are phenomena in local and regional markets. But we all know, on the other hand, that their function is to reinforce the competitive advantage for cluster members, especially for companies that participate in clusters. And of course, their goal is to function not only in the local or regional scale, but the goal is to help the companies to expand abroad. According to Porter, clusters are the right environment for firms with active outward internationalization ambitions. And such clusters that have internationalization ambitions are called dynamic clusters. And that is maybe the dream of us and of our Lithuanian colleagues, that we have in Poland and in Lithuania dynamic clusters. It means that we have clusters with very strong intensity of interactions among cluster members and strong intensity of interactions between cluster members and some external entities ready to cooperate with cluster members. That problem, that issue, is directly related to cluster internationalization. Cluster internationalization could be defined in different ways, and that is, of course, not our aim to discuss about definitions today. Let me just mention that we could recognize cluster internationalization as the process of increasing involvement of clusters, of cluster members in international operations. Some researchers pointed to the fact that the need for internationalization grows when the cluster grows. So when we have major clusters, the need to go abroad, to expand in some other markets is bigger and grows too. Now I would like to invite to discussion our experts, and let's start with, at first, quite general issues related to internationalization. I would like that you maybe share with us your expertise. What do you think about the internationalization of cluster organizations and clusters in Poland and in Lithuania? Is it possible to indicate any visible signs of internationalization? Can we talk about internationalization of clusters or just cluster organizations? Are both ways important, or maybe one way is less important than the other? I would like that you comment on that. And if I could invite maybe at first our women, our ladies, to share with us their views on the intensity of internationalization of clusters that you represent, of course.
Okay, so in our case, our cluster is a really small one. We have, we have a lot of members. They are small companies, so it's not that easy to go international with them. The main problem with it is that we don't have enough human resources in our cluster because as small companies, everybody concentrates, pays most attention to their own business, and they're not very keen on working on a cluster's interest. So we are trying to go international. We are trying to enter some international projects, and we are actually looking for partners to cooperate with. But the main problem is the human resources.
Okay.
When it comes to our cluster, which is a cluster involved with the industry of e-commerce, it's a thing that is global. So naturally, we want to internationalize and help to our companies to expand on the foreign markets. So the internationalization is not itself a goal right now, but it's activity we try to perform right now by finding similar clusters abroad and try to connect them, build a relationships and ecosystem to copy a good and best practices from and the standards that they provide. And we also try to build a network of services related to our industry that will help to expand the let's say sale of their services and the products abroad. That's what we do, but this is very hard to do. As Maria said, it's the problem of small companies who do not have a time and human resources to share their time with to act actively in this process.
Okay, so this is a great challenge, as we have already heard. Maybe our colleague from Lithuania could add some words to the perspective.
Well, talking of the perspective of Lithuanian clusters, I would say that internationalization is one of the core drivers of clustering as a whole, because similarly to the ones in Poland, Lithuanian clusters are mainly formed from rather small companies, which have limited possibilities of going abroad. So by joining into clusters, they acquire possibility to well, firstly, they target to go to international trade fairs and exhibitions to present themselves. By the other hand, talking of real everyday activity, not all of the clusters actually internationalize their core business activities. They go to the fairs, but if they come back without contracts, basically they concentrate more on the everyday work and maybe look for synergies in locally rather than internationally. So I'd say it's challenging in a similar way and it will take time actually until we can reap fruits from this process.
Okay, so as we could notice, the problems of Polish and Lithuanian cluster seems to be similar. Yeah, and Philip, maybe you could give an advice or uh, any hints, yes, for cluster managers that face such challenges.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Just a couple of points. Both clusters have actually done some very good work with internationalization. The architectural glass cluster has had a lot of contact with Germany and with German firms, possibly not so much for exporting, but at least for doing factory tours and site tours, which I think is very useful. And you have just come back from Paris. I don't know how many trips you've made to France this year.
We had 2 trips to Paris, and we've exhibited also in Retail Business Technology Expo in London this year.
Yeah, so I mean, there are some very good initiatives going on. I think these definitely the problems are there. It's always a problem of scale, of getting small companies to concentrate on a common objective, even when they're competing with each other. But at the end of the day, I think that the challenges that you will see are not unique to Poland and Lithuania. They are endemic to any cluster where you have many small firms occupying the same space. Now, some clusters here are particularly small. So, for instance, they have difficulty even filling one container and exporting it. They have difficulties in terms of cash flow, working capital, commercial contracting, and so on and so forth. But this is quite similar to a number of other countries. In the UK, Scottish Enterprise has done some very good work with internationalization. It took a very consistent long-term approach towards helping Scottish companies become international. And by international, we don't mean going to London, but we mean going across the channel, so to speak. And there we saw, for instance, that you need a very long-term approach. So we're talking about campaigns which are typically 5 to 8 years. You need very rapidly changing objectives because international markets change very quickly. You need a constant accompaniment by people who can help. And I think that does confirm the issue of human resources. That's very, very important. And I would say most of all, you need realistic objectives because a lot of companies feel that there's been a lot of money pumped into Poland by the EU, and some of this money is, okay, go to trade fair in Japan with, the expenses paid by the Marshal's office or by the innovation program or whatever. Well, it's easy to go to a trade fair in Japan. It's very difficult to sell in Japan, and then it's very difficult to provide after-sales service in Japan, and so on and so forth. So I think we need a very realistic appraisal of what can be achieved, given the strengths and the weaknesses of each supplier. And it's also important that whenever an initiative like this is planned, plan in terms of time, plan on a 5-year time horizon, not on an 18-month or a 24-month time horizon. It takes a very long time to really enter a foreign market or to make a joint venture or to do any of these activities of internationalization.
Okay, thank you very much. So, we have to take into account the factor of time, and we have to wait for the benefits and for the advantages. But while listening to you, I noticed that you mentioned some problems and some barriers, and in that way, we move to the next question about barriers in the internationalization of clusters and cluster organizations in Poland and Lithuania. And what kind of barriers could we mention? Are they related directly to the internal factors, yes, related to cluster members, or rather some external factors outside clusters, outside a particular cluster organization, or maybe both types, yeah? So, yes.
Okay, so I think that in our case, the main barrier is the motivation factor. Because our members, each year we have a conference
when we talk to them, we talk about our ideas, about our plans for the next year, and they seem to be really keen and prepared for action. But after the conference finishes, everybody goes home and they concentrate on their own companies, and they forget about our common interest. So the problem here is that if we had, I don't know, maybe few people who could stay in touch, because what I have to mention here that our companies, I mean our members, are spread among whole Poland. We're not all near Poznań. We have our members quite far away, so it's not that easy to stay in touch with them every day, every week or so, and it's difficult to keep them motivated. If we had this level of motivation as we do have while we're on the conference, then I believe that we could achieve much more.
Okay, so the human factor is the key success factor, yes, in your
Yes.
case. And what about the e-commerce connections
I
cluster?
think maybe it's not what is directly concerning us, because we are still founded by EU, and before the project is finished, we have some funds to go abroad to exhibit, to present our cluster members in front of other organizations and companies. But I think that the major problem will be in the moment when EU founding is stopped and cluster need to cope on their own. And I don't know how the standards in different cluster are in terms of many international clusters, but I think that it's not possible for the cluster to found themselves from their own resources, like membership fees or just the services they provide to cluster members, but they need to be founded also from governmental funds as well. So we need solid representatives for the cluster organizations as a whole to lobby on for our interest and support us with this, because it's not possible to cover all the costs and expenditures involved with the representation of the cluster members abroad and so on.
Okay, so to the list of barriers to the human factor, we could add the financial factor, yeah, especially in Poland. And what about our Lithuanian colleagues?
Well, similarly to what was said about the cluster experiences in Poland, I would say that to summarize it a little bit, because the main problems are very much the same. To summarize it, I could say that probably the main barrier is firstly the poor management of the clusters and inability to define the clear strategic vision and the common value the cluster members are receiving from the clustering as a whole. The other thing is that our clusters are not only small, but they are mostly very young, and they are still in a period when they are very much project based. So they can effectively implement one or another project, but when it comes to actually looking to a longer perspective of few years, they all of a sudden realize that they don't see the clear value of what's possible to achieve, and probably this is something which needs to be addressed firstly. The funny thing here is that EU funding is meant actually to help this whole process. But it seems that in many cases it prevents actually the clusters from developing further, because it's much easier writing a good proposal and getting some EU grant to finance your activity for a year or two. But when it comes to an end, I believe that quite a lot of clusters will simply dissolve, to make space actually to the ones who will be better prepared of doing that.
Okay, so
Yes, I would like to add something because what Sharon's taught is very important because the time when we have a EU funding is very short and it's very hard to build a real value of the cluster in this time apart from all the formal things that you have to convey during the project. That is maybe that will be the problem that clusters may dissolve after this period because they don't have a time to build this real value and for the cluster members as well.
And also here again, it's much easier to get EU funding for bigger clusters.
another challenge, yes. And well, I think that maybe a kind of solution will be devoting more time for the development of cooperation among companies. What do you think? Maybe, Philip, would you like to comment on that?
You know, the traditional definition of a cluster applies typically to a very clear geographic area which has hundreds of members in it. So if we take Porter's definition and you know the examples he was studying, if we take the California wine cluster, we're really looking at a cluster which emerged quickly, but it emerged because of very clear commercial self-interest, common self-interest. Now, I think what Poland and Lithuania are doing is actually very valuable, trying to build clusters from scratch. That's a quite good policy goal. I don't know. I can't tell how things will happen in the future. I think we're now in year 4, so this is the second 2-year project that we've done. We've seen clusters continue to grow, continue to try to fight, continue to try to survive, and I think that I think we all recognize the problem.
Yeah.
That's guaranteed. But I think we also, in a way, underestimate the real value of people's initiative and people's motivation for doing this. I mean, the clusters that we've worked with, like Sylvia's cluster, Mary's cluster, are, you know, there's some very good people there, some very good companies. So I don't know if we can maybe zoom out a bit, you know, away from the problems and the EU timeframes and all that. I think we do need to look at a longer term basis. And certainly we need to think possibly in terms of decades, not in terms of
Exactly.
2-year project cycles.
Yeah. So maybe we could indicate any kind of measures that the cluster managers could use. I would maybe change a little my question, not only to foster the internationalization of clusters, but I would add to foster the competition among cluster members, because in my opinion, I think that it could be a kind of remedy against the problems that the companies will face when the financing EU funds will be over. Yeah, so maybe it could be a kind of remedy, a kind of defense strategy. Yeah, because when we will have links, relationships, it could help us later to solve the lack of capital. Yeah, maybe.
Can I just make a quick point there?
Yeah.
I don't think it's we have competition is about supply and demand.
Yeah.
And in Poland today, we have a fundamental problem or issue that EU subsidies have totally distorted the supply side, and the demand side is distorted as well because of that. So we have, I mean, you know it better than I do. There's so much money invested in training programs that people don't show up for training programs anymore.
Yeah.
There's so much money available for clusters that clusters were being formed 5 years ago with 6 members because it was a nice project, not because there was so. Yeah, I mean, we have to be, competition may be one way, but if you look from inside the cluster, I don't think it's really an issue of competition right now. It's really just building, you know, steady, step-by-step building of foundations, of building blocks, of trust, of cooperation, trying to get some success, trying to expand the cluster. We're really at the nitty-gritty level of operations right now.
So my idea was about co-opetition, yeah. So combining competition, because we still have to compete as companies to gain the market share, but at the same time finding some areas in which we could do something together. I think it's partially related to the previous panel where we talked about cooperation while collecting some information, marketing information. Yeah, it could be one potential area of cooperation. So, being still competitors, trying to find, of course, some common goals that will create relationships. Yeah. Sylvia,
Yes, I believe
yeah.
that co-opetition is a thing that we should do in terms of internationalizations, because small companies that are a member of clusters do not have this resources, human resources and finances to do larger projects abroad. So we have to educate them and enhance them to go together on common projects, although they can compete on it. But in such a project, you need to choose a leader who is in charge of the project, and as our let's say part as a cluster management is to be a moderator of such a activity, to act as a organization that prevents the intellectual property and know-how of each company,
Yes.
but they still can work together.
Okay, so yeah,
Yeah,
Maria?
in case of our cluster, a great benefit is the fact that I mentioned before, that we are spread in whole Poland. So we're
So
not.
on the one hand, this is a benefit. Yeah. On the
Yeah,
other hand, the
exactly,
challenge.
because we're not strictly we're not competing with each other right now.
Directly.
Because directly, if we're far away, because we are the manufacturers of glass. Glass is heavy, glass is difficult to transport, so small companies are like concentrated mainly on their cities and close area, not the whole Poland.
Mhm.
So that's a big advantage, and we are more like we are cooperating. We're trying to get to know each other's know-how, as you said.
Mhm.
Yeah, and our members are not they're not afraid of the competition of other members,
Mhm.
and they really like to meet with each other. We are having workshops together when they talk to each other and they share their know-how.
Okay, so and could we indicate any particular measures to foster the internationalization? Maybe our experts could mention at something. Cernas.
I mean, we can build an entire balanced scorecard type of
Yes.
framework for this, but it would be things like the amount of resources or the quantitative indicators on internationally focused sales activities. So, for instance, the number of trade fairs you participate in, the number of contacts per trade fair, the follow-up done, just classic quantitative indicators. We can point to the sales share of the cluster members. Is the cluster actively helping drive their sales outside? And, do they start with, say, I don't know, 5% and they continue to grow? Probably at the cluster level, not every member can develop equally. So probably there may be one or two runaway successes who can really start selling outside their home area or do production or whatever. Whereas there might be other members who just cannot or aren't in a position to. So it's a very mixed type of a framework that we're looking at. We also need to remember that there is a value chain in internationalization. It tends to start out with pure sales activities, so purely commercial activities, either imports or exports. We then move one step up, which is typically subcontracting, whereby, for instance, you have a Polish company that is providing components, say, to a company in Germany. Then you go again one step up, which might be a joint venture or entering the markets with your own subsidiary. And then a further step up, which is actually research and development and product customization specifically for that market in that market. So it's a very, very complex environment. And I think we also have to remember that it also includes imports. We shouldn't think of internationalization as only being a one-way street, whereby, if we export, we win, if we import, we lose. Very often, by importing new products and services, you can really transform a sector or a niche within your home country, and that's equally important.
So
And I would also add that actually everything what Philip said is absolutely true, and there's a real motivation factor for clusters to enter is just a possibility to share the costs which are needed, because entering foreign markets may involve huge costs which are unbearable for any of the small companies. By the other hand, if we are talking about import, basically it's again quite helpful if we look from this perspective. We can invite a supplier for a visit to a country who may be visiting 10 or 20 potential partners instead of one, which again provides a big value here. So I believe one of the main opportunities in clustering is actually we need to do it properly. We need to have proper management structure. We need to use proper management tools. Then we can actually set the goals and think of other kind of operations. In many cases, the problem is that our clusters are simply poorly managed. Actually, they are managed as small companies. Well, when they grow, actually, this may not be enough. Actually, I'm not talking of particular clusters, but there's plenty of examples of good clusters, but there's also plenty of examples of ones which are really poorly managed.
In your comments, I noticed that on the one hand, you presented to us that internationalization can be developed on the side of companies, yeah, as Philip mentioned, yeah, this is the evolutionary approach, yeah, that we grow as a company becoming more and more internationalized. And on the other hand, soon as you mentioned, some activities, potential areas of activity for cluster organizations, yes, so what exactly cluster organizations can do to support the business efforts, the companies. And in that way, we can go further. Oops. Excuse me. Because when we talk about the services of cluster organizations, we have in mind the term commercialization. Yeah? And do you see maybe any links between the necessity to go abroad, to expand abroad, and to commercialize the activities of cluster organizations? And it's partially related to the challenge of self-financing, yeah, as our cluster managers mentioned. Could you comment, please, on that?
Yeah, exactly. It's very much related with the self-contained clusters in the longer run when the EU funding expires. So I'd say that we see quite a lot of successful examples of clusters in Lithuania, which are already commercializing it one way or another, like jointly funding foreign missions or retaining the sales offices in distant countries like Japan or China. Same applies to open access points of let's say where cluster members can use some kind of equipment for a fee, which in many cases is more advantageous than in case the same services are provided to external members in external bodies, not the members of the cluster. So there's plenty of ways how we can commercialize internally, and I believe that's going to grow in the future. Should it be based on some monthly fees like subscription fees, or should that be based on case by case generated fees? It's difficult to say at this point, but obviously we should be moving on this direction.
Okay.
Probably franchising could also be an option.
about our cluster managers, maybe their view of that
Yes,
issue.
there is multiple ways how we can commercialize our activities and services internationally. I think that we also can implement some research and development projects in different countries, so we can then in the further way commercialize it also. So this is the way how to extend our cooperation and collaboration not just locally, but also with the other countries and other organizations as well.
Well, for us, it's the most that we can do to commercialize and go international is keep meeting with other clusters representatives, other people. Right now, we're working with Netherlands, Germany, Sweden, and we're starting to cooperate with USA. And all of those contacts were made by, like, it wasn't planned. I just met those people while I was in places like this. We got to talking. Just last month, I met a person who might give us the biggest project of our whole cluster, and this is just because I keep going to those places, keep meeting more and more people, and it's not made by any like internal.
Strategy, yeah,
Yeah.
just a nice surprise, yeah, with added value.
Yeah.
If I can just add a small
Yes,
point,
of
one
course.
of our startups is a cluster international. We have over 7,000 members, but I believe only about 200 are actually fee-paying members, subscribers, in other words. So you can tell just how difficult it might be to actually convert members who are happy now with what is a free service into a service they have to pay for later on.
And, um, I think that becoming self-financing organizations is really a huge issue, and as you have mentioned, it will take some time, not only because of money, but because of our, I think, approach towards clustering. That I think the European approach is a little different than the American approach because of what you have already mentioned, European funds among others. Yeah, but for sure this is the direction for the future. Yeah, and maybe you as cluster managers and consultants, we all have to think about what kind of services could we offer, what kind of tools could we develop, yeah, to on the one hand be still an attractive I would say solution for companies on the one hand, on the other hand to earn money, yeah, for the existence of a particular cluster organization. And I think that some interesting information can we find in the presentation of one of our experts. And now I would like to invite Sarunas to join me there, and he will share with us some findings of their projects related to the tools that we can use, yeah, to foster the internationalization, to cope with the challenge of commercialization.
So I, well, Well, firstly, I wouldn't say it's like we are talking of real tools. Basically, we are talking of one of the deliverables of our current project, which will partly help. We believe it will help the clusters which are already members of the project in Poland and Lithuania, as well as numerous other clusters or future clusters in achieving their activities. So one of the core issues we've seen in while working with clusters in Poland and Lithuania is the fact that that in many cases the managers don't have sufficient background of running a cluster. Running a cluster is actually something which for which you need some specific tools and specific knowledge, which needs to be either learned or developed over time. So we are trying actually to make this process a little bit faster and reduce the risks and downfalls and pitfalls actually which may be found on the way. So to share the knowledge we develop during these EU co-funded projects via Leonardo projects, we developed the learning management platform, which should become a hub of competencies and a possibility to share the specific information on clustering and provide some online trainings for cluster members in the future. The platform is actually primarily meant to be used as cluster members or people who are thinking of starting a cluster just to receive some learning and probably even one-to-one consultations from our experts. But also it is an opportunity for educators and other consultants who may use our platform to spread their specific knowledge and their expertise they develop in their everyday operations, not just as part of our project. As well as the third group could be any general audience which is targeting to develop their skills in management, marketing, and many other disciplines. The platform is obviously free to use to both students and consultants, and obviously we are open to all cooperation opportunities from both sides. So you guys, if you have any ideas of how to improve it, if you lack some kind of knowledge or some specific training material in the system, you are always welcome to contact us and request the specific course, which we will be happy to add. So the platform is currently in the testing phase, and it will be open to public already in December 2015. You may find an email address, and we encourage you to drop a registration request for us, and we will be happy to enroll you to the system and inform you as soon as the platform is open for public access. And obviously, you need to note the address of the system itself, which you may find www.intercom-training.com. To make it a little bit more lively, this is a screenshot of what you are going to see when the system go live. It's still not, but because we are still adding initial training materials to the system. But already in December you'll be able to use it. So that's the short presentation I wanted to make. So please take a note of the two addresses, the email address and the web address of the new system, and I'm waiting to hear from all of you.
I think we are enough lucky to have just 5 minutes left, that we can maybe invite our audience to questions. And so if you have any questions to our experts, please hesitate just to ask, to share your comments and your views with us. If you don't have any questions, I that we will have time for coffee, and we will have some time for informal talks, as our experts are still sitting at the table on the right side of the room. So please do not hesitate if you have any questions you would like just to share your views, maybe in an informal way. Thank you very much for your attention, for being with us. I would like to thank you very much, our experts, once again. Thank you.
Państwu serdecznie dziękujemy za wysłuchanie prelekcji i dyskusji na temat podnoszenia kwalifikacji przez menadżerów klastru. Mam nadzieję, że nasze materiały opublikowane na stronie internetowej, na platformie internetowej, którą Państwo zaprezentował pan Šarūnas Pundzius z Litwy, przydadzą się Państwu. Zachęcamy do kontaktu z Izbą. Jesteśmy dla Państwa dostępni.